Okay, we are on day 3 acrylic paint. This is the last day of the painting boot camp. For today, you are going to need to work in a nice clean surface on top of a table or a desk. Make sure when you're painting, water is far away from your electronics so you don't accidentally spill it. We're using our acrylic paints. I have a jar of water. I have a few different size brushes here. No big deal if you don't have these sizes, but if you do, I would use, these are 3 different brushes that I have out. My palette today, I just chose a paper plate. I think it's a little easier to have a flat surface if you have a paper plate. If not, it's not 100% necessary. For the wash, you're going to need to add water to your acrylic paint. So for that, you probably don't want to do it on a paper plate, at least a really thin one. I feel like if you have some sort of empty container that you can use, I would use that. An empty Tupperware, because you're going to add water, it's going to be kind of drippy. Something that you can wash out, that would be perfect. Otherwise, you could actually open up your watercolors and use this little tray. You can add some water into this tray and then just rinse it out and do your wash on this little palette here attached to your watercolors. Just make sure you clean it when you're done. Okay, and of course I have paper towel. Always have a paper towel near you when you are painting. All right, let's get started. The first step is wet on dry, and just like with watercolors, what you're going to do is you are going to paint that area, pick a color, let it dry, and then we'll come back to it. I'm actually going to go with black. Now, when you're painting this spot, try to fill in most of the space. I'm actually going to avoid my edges for this because I don't have anything down underneath my paper. I do recommend for you guys that you get a piece of newspaper or something down on your underneath your paper. That way you can paint all the way to the edge. For this assignment, this is not a final wow piece or anything like that, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. Okay, I'm going to let that dry. Remember, you don't add water to acrylic paints except with the exception of if you're doing a wash, and I will show you how to do that in a minute. When you clean your brush, especially with a dark color like that, rub it on the bottom of your container of water and try to get all that water out of it. Okay, so next is gradient blending. What that means is that you're going to try to blend, go from one color to the next, but you don't want to turn it all into one color, mix it so much that it becomes one color. You want to see a difference between one color to the next. So I want you to try a couple of these. I'm going to try yellow, red going to yellow, or yellow going to red, whatever. So I'm going to try to start here. I'm going to start here with the red. I'm going to put a little kind of glob of paint down. I'm going to clean my brush and dry it because now I'm going in for the yellow paint. And I'm going to put that over here. And I'm going to try to kind of blend it. So I'm going to start moving my paint over closer to the red. And now with the paint on the brush, I'm actually going to just start move it here. I'm going to try to make the transition smooth. Now red is much stronger than yellow. It's a darker color. So if I kept blending over and over, going over with my brush, it would probably just, the whole thing would turn to orange or like an orange red. And I kind of want to avoid that. So I'm going to take a clean brush and I'm going to try add a little more yellow to my brush here. I'm going to try to make it a smooth transition. Okay, I'm going to clean the paint off this brush. Now this just takes a little bit of practice, but you should, with a few times practicing, be able to get a nice transition here. So I made mine small because I want you guys to try a few different colors. So it works really nicely to do 2 primary colors because then you can mix the secondary color in the middle. So I started yellow and red, and I got that nice orange in the middle. Okay, so I would like you to try here a few different colors, not just one. Try to do some blending with a few different colors, transitioning just like this. So blue to red, for example, or even a black to white, I think would be really hard to get a nice white at the end of it, but you can try. It's almost like a value scale here. Okay, next I'm going to show you the wash. This is where we're going to add some water. I recommend that you get some clean water. I just have a container here of clean water. So when you add the water to the paint, it's not going to be dirty water. So I'm going to pour a little bit of water in here. And I would say for a wash, depending on how much, like how transparent you want it, your wash is going to be, you know, you're going to add paint to it depending on how transparent you want it. So I'm going to try to clean this brush off. I'm going to make my wash blue. So that's all I'm using. So you can kind of see how much paint to water. So definitely more water than paint. And you're essentially making a watercolor. So let's say you're using acrylic paint, but there's an area that you want kind of transparent. I'm going to add a little more paint to this. It looks too watery. So what you could do, you don't want to go and just grab your watercolors when you're doing an acrylic painting. So what you can do is you can make a wash with your acrylic paint. Okay, so I just made my own watercolor paint, essentially. So this is pretty light. This works nicely if you want to do like an underwater scene, and the paint, for example, you don't want the paint to be like totally opaque, or opaque means you can't see through it. You want it kind of watery. You can do this method. Okay. If you want it darker, you would just add more paint to it. So I'm going to add more paint, see if we can get a darker spot. Yeah. All right. Okay. All right, so that is the wash. Now, splatter. This is everybody's favorite. Splatter, you actually need to water down your paint as well. So let's say I want to do a scene. Maybe it looks like it's snowing, and I want kind of like a wet sort of, you know, splattering on it to make it look like the snow is coming down. In a similar way, and I'm going to use my watercolor tray here for this one. In a similar way that you make your wash, you're going to water down the paint that you want to splatter. So I'm just taking some white here, and you want to use clean, especially if you're using white. You want to use clean water. So I'm going to add a drop of that to my tray here. I'm a little concerned that my brush might not be totally clean, but we shall see. Now mix it in. I'm going to add a little more paint. When you're doing this at home, the splatter will splatter everywhere. So go somewhere where you can do this, where you're not going to get it all over important papers or your electronics. I would even put down a piece of newspaper if you can, or maybe step outside. So you might need to do this part, you know, asynchronously, like when you're not in Zoom with me. Okay, so there's 2 ways to do splatter. One way is to tap. Okay, you get bigger drops that way. And another way to get littler ones is to kind of do this flicking method. The flicking method really can look like snow or stars. I'm going to bring my paper up so you can see it a little bit better. It's kind of hard to see on the blue, but actually on the black you can see it really well. Which brings me to the wet on dry technique. Now, I might actually, you can do splatter on top of this dry paint here. So I'm actually gonna add a little more because I just thought this would look very cool as like a night scene. So, let me find my skinny brush, dry it off. Maybe for my wet on dry, maybe I'm gonna paint my moon on here. Hopefully my black paint is totally dry. Okay, so I've got a moon in the background. I can add some stars. There's one star. I want to try a different color. I'm going to go for the yellow here. Ugh, my brush is a little watery, I can tell. I'm going to dry. If it comes out kind of transparent and drippy like that, definitely a good idea to dry your brush off and try again. Okay. I think you guys get the idea. So if you were to paint something like a night sky, you definitely would get that black on top first, let it dry, and it dries super fast. Acrylic paint is usually dry in like 10 minutes or less, depending on how thick you did it, and then you would paint on top of it. So thinking about layering. All right, you guys, time for you to get started.